Let us get started. My name is Karen Boroff, and I'm going to have my colleagues wave to you as I call them out. Burke Loxley, co-author, Tom McGee, co-author, and Michael Soupios. You'll eventually get the full slide deck, and you'll get everybody's emails on this. I do want to say that I know we all wish we could be with one another. The technology is wonderful, but I would just so love to see you all and chat with you, but we don't have that opportunity at this moment. But we all pray for that time when the heavens will open and we'll be with one another again. I do want to commend the team that I have, and I wish you all could work with the tech colleagues that I've been able to work with in co-authoring this presentation. They have been an incredible resource, rejuvenating in a big way, and also have calmed me down on all the technology know-nothings that are in my portfolio. Our segment is on questions and answers, deploying a chatbot technology in order to enhance student engagement. So you'll see on the next slide that as we, Tom, if you could just advance that. If you think of
waiting.
Okay.
Getting that lag time again.
Yes, okay, we'll continue. As you think about how a manager's work is, Mintzberg tells us in fundamental literature review that he did that a manager's time is fragmented. There is all sorts of input that comes his or her way. That work is fragmented. You have many different tasks. You get a little bit of information here, and then you move on to the next one. So you have an awful lot of incoming stimuli. As a result, time is a resource, and the ability to make courses of action under compressed time becomes valuable. The ability to ask pointed questions for a course of action becomes a valuable skill. So we hope with the chatbot technology to begin to develop more that press that students feel on gathering information, asking appropriate questions, and of course ones that screen out any biases they may have, because you really want to get the best set of facts you can for a course of action. So we believe that this demonstration that you'll see helps move students in the direction of asking fact-based questions in order to make courses of action. The technology has made our ability to do this easier. Years ago, when I first thought about this, the technology was bulky, voice recognition was difficult, artificial intelligence wasn't where it's at. Not that it's perfect now, but certainly the technology has moved the needle considerably. That makes what we're going to describe certainly more feasible. Because there's Q&A that's going on, all students can be engaged, and later on you will see some neat analytics that will help you quantify students' engagement.
She's in her office. We're actually in a conference presentation right now.
Okay. Because the technology asks you to put your prompt very quickly on, it has caused you to become a little bit more adept at making a very strong, powerful hook, which is something we all want in case development. The chatbot technology does not change some of the fundamentals of our case development work. Learning objectives still are paramount. The case itself must be the vehicle to develop the learning objectives. Decision focus is still required. Relevant theory is still required. So some of those fundamentals are unchanged. But what is new is, as a case writer and with your tech development people, to think about strongly what are the kinds of questions that students may pose in order to develop a course of action, and then embed that intelligence in the chat box so you'll be able to give students answers to the questions that may come forth as they're developing their course of action. So and of course the case still needs to be real. So you work through developing questions. The added value, as we went through the many trials of this, we found increasingly the need for students to ask fact-based questions. we tumble to all our different trials that students express difficulty in asking a fact-based question. They might ask, how do you feel? Those kinds of things, but those feeling kinds of questions weren't necessarily fact-based that would lead to a course of action. As I said before, you will see in our demonstration that there's ability to limit time and questions asked to really hone in students' ability to ask questions. And in addition, there'll be some neat analytics you'll see that will talk about, you can start probing the kinds of questions probed, which I think will be very unique as an instructor in debriefing the case. Case development and technology. So again, the case stresses the organization of questions and fact-based ones. So when the students first gets the question, the prompt, they are urged that they have to ask, or they have to organize their questions that they want to ask, although they can ask them in any order, and they should be fact-based ones. In addition, as we work through our many trials, we realized that some of the questions that were posed were one-offs that we could bundle into an answer that was more robust than the single sentence that we were giving to the students. So in our case development, we learned ourselves about what could be linked, what was a dead hit, what was a dead end, what was something we knew nothing about, and how we could respond to that. I'm going to pass this over to Tom and Burke now, two of the partners of the technology brains behind this, and let them share their additional work on the technology partnership.
Hi, everybody. We can get into more of the details of the technology later on, but we had been doing some work previously on developing chatbots, and we had settled on Amazon AWS. Oh, I'm getting an echo of myself. AWS, they offer some fairly simple tools for building out an initial chatbot with some instructions. Amazon, of course, in their AWS tool, they've got a tremendous number of sub-tools and different variations of things you can do. Depending on the capabilities and the knowledge of your development team, you can do a lot. So, but working together with the material that we had and what we wanted to present for the purposes of this is what you're going to see in a little while.
And sort of to Tom's point, what really builds the bot, what the strength of the bot is the testing. When we're able to take multiple students from different backgrounds and different experiences, what they bring to the bot is a different style of asking questions. We have the facts of a case, and those are the answers. But what really builds the bot is loading in the questions, loading in the answers, and then finding the avenue that connects the two. And the way you do that is by having students ask new questions. Students ask the same question in a different way. And what we found was there were certain questions, as to Karen's point, that were, standalones that probably could have been merged with something else. And really, those questions helped us find that. The variety of question asked, the verbiage, those types of things are what really help us to increase the bot's ability to interpret a question and guide you to an answer. Because, as we said, the fact-based questioning is really, you getting the data, taking the knowledge base, building it, and then just making your decision. So next slide, please, Tom. So when those students would sit down with the page that we built, it's listed at the top, and I'll ask you to wait until after our presentation to have fun with that, because it is actually a fun exercise. What they'd be greeted by is many aspects. There is the bot itself, there is the description of the case, but chiefly, and actually what I would argue is probably the most important part of what we had, is the introduction, because the introduction through an evolutionary process really helped us scope what the user needed to do, what the student needed to do in the realm of fact-based questions. There was a lot of, and you'll see this later, we get the data. Every question that's asked is cataloged and we can access it. And what we found is there was a lot of questions like, what would you do if you were me? What do you think I should do? And these are not the best course of action, because as you'll read in the prompt, and I'm not going to read the whole thing for you, you only get to ask 7 questions. And in doing so, the introduction really has to help you to understand you need to organize your thoughts. Every question you ask gives you an answer. Every answer broadens your knowledge base beyond the initial prompt, and then scopes the next question, and that continues. And then once you have your 7 questions, now you can render your decision as the manager. And Karen will go into detail about exactly what I'm alluding to. But Mike actually can take it from here.
Let me see if I can successfully unmute my microphone this time. Sorry, guys. I think I broke halfway through Karen's bit. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can actually see the bot in action here for a second. So let me share this thing. You're going to get that crazy window effect for a second. I'm just going to share the entire screen. Hit share, minimize out of that, minimize away from that. Okay, so this is the case as it is, and someone tell me if they can't see it, because I'm rolling here. So we're at the university's website, and we have the introduction that you just saw on the slides that Burke mentioned, and it does give you some of the very basic background. I'm a manager, and I've had a couple of my employees out there in the world doing something. Long story short, what happens is there's a company-supported basketball game that goes on, and 2 of the employees are playing in the basketball game, and they get into a little bit of an argument during, and it goes over into the parking lot afterwards. Turns out a punch is thrown, and one of the employees stabs the other employee, sending that employee to the hospital. So the real gist of this is that the employer finds out about it the next day when one of the employees comes to work and the other doesn't. And in the course of, hey, what happened last night? The boss, Mr. Weldon, comes to you and says, hey, you're my manager. How do I handle this? And that's really the prompt here, is that you are now, faced with this management dilemma where you've got these 2 employees that have been fighting, and you have to figure out, well, what is our role as management to try to figure out what goes on. So as Burke mentioned, you've got 7 questions, and I know obviously in a real situation like this, 10,000 questions come to mind, but we're really trying to get people to focus in and understand the concept of really getting to the heart of the matter. So I'm going to go ahead and ask a couple of questions, and I'll show you how the bot responds. Let me very quickly zoom in a little bit here so you can see more of it. And let's just see if I can slide over. I'll slide down. Okay, so bear with me as I type through this. First question that I would have is probably, was this a basketball game that occurred on company time? So did this game occur on company time? And the bot thinks for a second, and the bot thinks for a second, and it tells me right away that ITC, the company that we all work for, underwrote the league fees for this adult basketball game, including making t-shirts with our logo on it. The game was held off premises and did not occur on company time, obviously. However, if ITC sponsored the team, if they didn't sponsor the team, it wouldn't have existed. So right away, you know that this isn't an event that happened on company time, but still the company is prominently featured throughout this. So that begs a question right away. Who saw our employees fighting in this? You'll note 2 important things here. First of all, there's a thumbs up, thumbs down, which you can actually use to kind of rate the response to the question. Now, normally, I would rate this as a thumbs up because it did answer my question, but I'm not going to do that right now because there is a little bit of a bug in the software that if I go ahead and interact with the bot by clicking the thumbs up, it's going to count as one of my questions. And I really only have 7, so I don't want to mess with that right now. Certainly something that we're working on, and those of you out there in the world who've played with Amazon AWS Web Services and not seen some of their documentation, it's going to take us some time to figure out how to fix that one. So let me ask my second question. Did anyone witness the fight? Did anyone Now, this is one that we would think that the bot should absolutely understand, but it doesn't. This is one of those ones that I asked it in a way that probably someone else hasn't asked it before, or we haven't picked up on it. And I did this on purpose. Did anyone witness the fight? I think is a very good question. But if I swap the question just a little bit and say, were there any witnesses? It will tell me. Okay, there were no witnesses. So obviously there's a little bit of a disconnect between did anyone witness the fight and were there any witnesses? And that's something that, you know, Burke will explain in a couple of minutes how we can go through and kind of clean that up as we kind of play with this. But obviously, if I asked a question that it didn't understand, it says, sadly, I do not completely understand the question. Perhaps you could rephrase. And it does warn me that this counts as one of my 7. Now, for the purposes of this demonstration, I've actually cheated a little bit, and we've turned this thing into 8 questions just for today. So if you are going to test this out later on and you see that it allows you to ask 8 questions, that's because we were messing with it. I didn't want to lose my question while we were doing this. But to get to the real question, were there any witnesses? Not any witnesses, no cameras, no videos. However, the coach of ITC's team did approach Lanzi after the game before, and Lanzi's one of the 2 combatants. There's Lanzi and Bill. I probably should have mentioned that earlier. After the game and asked him why he was being kind of a jerk. Lanzi obviously was a little combative, told the coach to mind his business, and then the coach left, and then apparently Bill approached Lanzi as well, and that's where the fight happened. You get a lot of that in the prompt, not the bit about the coach, obviously, but exactly what happened between Bill and Lanzi here in the prompt, and you can read that again later on. Okay, so again, I'm not going to interact with a yes/no. I would have reacted with a no on this other one, but again, I don't want to lose the question. So the next thing I would go to, obviously, someone went to the hospital. Is there a police report? And let's see what the bot comes back with. And the bot comes back with what you would expect. The only report was the police report. No one else reported the incident, which means Bill didn't report it, Lanzi didn't report it. Police came to the scene where Bill was and took information. Bill French described the knife. The police obtained the knife from Lanzi. They talk a little bit about the knife, which I could ask questions on if I wanted to. Bill apparently did not want to press charges, and the police let it go at that. Apparently, a stabbing in whatever city this event takes place is not that big a deal, so the police were willing to let it drop. So we've got no witnesses to the event other than the 2 combatants. And if you read the prompt, actually, Bill doesn't remember much of the event after he was stabbed. So he's not doing anything. And Lanzi hasn't reported any of this. So why don't we ask the question and see if we can get Lanzi's side of the story. Was Lanzi acting normal the next day? Sorry about my typing. Okay, Lanzi Lucas reported to work the day after the incident, but was sent home. Pending this investigation, there were no visible signs of bruises on Lanzi's hands or face, didn't display any outward signs of remorse. In fact, seemed no different than usual. So yeah, that begs a lot of questions about the person and character of Lanzi, but again, I don't really have many details of the fight, so I don't want to be too judgy in this situation. Nobody saw the fight. So I've got to ask myself a couple of other questions. Again, after company time, nobody really saw what was going on here. What else do I have? Have these guys had any trouble in the past? Bill and Lanzi had any trouble in the past? Something that's been brewing for some time, okay? Nothing that the ITC knew about, so nothing the company knew about. There's no record of medical issues, there's no examination, none of the guys have had any problem as far as we can tell. This, if you read this question, or if you read the response to this question, isn't a really well fleshed out one. I probably could have asked that question in a couple of different ways, you know, asked if they had fought before or anything else that may have given me a little more detail. But this is telling me there's no real record of medical issues. So this is close, but probably not a perfect response to what we're looking for. As I come through here, what question am I on? I think that's 5 questions I've asked so far. Really, 4 questions, and I asked the dummy question in there. You know what's probably a really good question? Let's go ahead and see what is ITC's policy on fighting. Now, as a manager, I would probably know this, but just in case I don't and it's not in the prompt, I find out that fighting on the job is typically a 2-week suspension with final warning of dismissal. right? We know that Bill and Lanzi haven't fought before, but I wonder if either of them have been cited, because if they have, then I've got a bigger question. Because again, this wasn't really on company time, but it's kind of a company supported thing. So I'm a little concerned about, exactly where we should be. So has Bill or Lanzi been cited for FIGHTING in the past? Nope, no employees have lodged formal complaints about either man. After the incident, union represented employees in the office signed a letter that they continue to work with Lanzi Lucas. About 30% signed the petition. So obviously the union has jumped in and has said, hey, let's make sure that we cover our guy Lanzi's back. And one thing that we didn't ask early on, probably could have, was Lanzi injured in the fight? I kind of already know the answer to that one because we saw it earlier, but I really wanted to get us to the point where it's already told me that I've asked 8 questions. Again, the prompt will normally be 7, but I achieved it a little bit just so I could get that bad question in there. This is what happens at the end. After you've asked your 7 questions, it will tell you, you've asked 7 and now we're done. So what you want to do is review the case, take a look at the information that you've gathered, and then you're prompted to go and complete this brief survey. Based on your responses to the 7 questions, please put forth a course of action to resolve the matter. I'm going to say fight took place off hours. Perhaps if I was the manager, I would note it in their file that they had been fighting at an off-campus event, but I don't know that we have any legal recourse here. Fight noted in records, comma, no action taken. I'm sure many of you are out there screaming, no, that's not the right answer. And I get that. My employees luckily don't fight with knives at basketball games. So I'm gonna put that as my response, drop that in when we continue on. Now, to help us tune this thing a little bit, what question was most important one for you? Put forth in your recommended course of action. Is Lanzi or Bill insane? Right? Because really, seriously, get into a fight at a company basketball game where one of you is hospitalized is terrible. What 1 or 2 questions? Oh, which one was most important? I'm sorry, I jumped ahead there. Let me get rid of that, drop that in there. What question was most important? Probably company fighting policy, right? So that one really did start to show us that, this is an off-hours thing, and the only policy that we have about fighting is that they fight twice while at work, and the second time is an automatic dismissal, no matter how long a person had been with the company, what kind of employee they were, what have you. So I'm going to say mine was company fighting policy. Is Lanzi or Bill insane? Who's the more valuable employee? Not that really makes a huge difference. So, I mean, you could ask a bunch of other questions that we can start to think of, okay, well, if people do ask these, how are we going to throw them in? And what suggestions do you have to improve the case study? I like the idea of a counter of questions. I know we've talked about this a little bit before. We've looked into it. I would like to see, okay, it tells me, here's your response, and this is question 1 of 7, 2 of 7, 3 of 7. Because if you do lose track, it can be a little problematic if you think you have one more question and then can't ask it. That also obviously makes you be very clear in your thought process and really think about your questions ahead of time before you just kind of start willy-nilly typing them in. Okay, counter of questions, and the interaction element should work a little better. Okay, so really, if I submit my responses, we get the thank you, and that's the whole thing. You'll note that once I'm done, we're setting a cookie in the session, which will not allow me to do this again. But if I did want to do this multiple times, obviously I'm in incognito mode here. I can go ahead and start another one, and it would allow me to do it. Obviously, if I were in my regular browser, it would tell me right away, hey, you've already completed this assessment. You can't come back in. But since I'm doing this in incognito mode, I can do it multiple times. Okay, and I think I'm going to go back to Hopin. Let me stop sharing this thing before everybody gets the crazy parallax view of what happens. I think that's it for me.
And I guess I'll step in here. So we had the questions, we had the the input, and Mike showed a great job of how the test is done. And what happens is all of those questions are cataloged, and what you see in front of you is a word map. It's standard word map format. The larger the sentence you see there, the bigger the footprint, the more times it's been asked. You can display this in multiple ways. You can just get a list that tells you. But really what I like about this, and I understand you may have to double click on it, and even then, due to restrictions, you're not going to get a really clear picture of what it is. You get to see a visual representation of where the thought process is. And honestly, like Mike alluded to, it's a fight. What are the sizes of the two men? Who threw the first punch? And then at the same time, you are, whether it be HR or management, you're a company individual. So who's been with the company longer? Are there hierarchy, supervisor, union issues at play?
Mhm.
Those are questions that are certainly worth exploring. And what we can see is what we've said all along, that there's so many different questions that can ask in so many different ways. So really, what I keep getting back to is all of these questions, good or bad. And as Mike showed, there are good questions that we hadn't even thought of yet that are, a new avenue that we need to explore. So every question strengthens the bot from both ends. And Karen pointed this out earlier. We may have an answer, and to take one quick step back, when I say an answer, it's just a piece of data. And then the question is the query that comes in, and based on the keywords in the query and the keywords in the answer, a handshake is made, and that's how you get your answer. Do we need to flag new keywords? Do we need to change the dialect in the question pool that leads you to this answer? Do we need to combine them? I think you could kind of tell just based on Mike's interactions. A lot of those answers gave you a lot more than you asked for, but when you only have 7, that's important. And really what we were going for is giving you the data, letting you process it. And as Mike did a great job of showing you, okay, now I have a new question. Maybe I thought of a question earlier. I'm not going to ask that one. I want to go down this avenue, especially once you see, the company policy. And really this is a representation of that. There's AWS has the ability to, as Karen said earlier, you could do voice recognition, so that way you could just speak to the bot through a microphone. You don't have to type it in. They can display it in all different forms, tables. Just this data, you can filter it through so that you only get what we term no hits, where, when you've stumped the bot. And on the next slide, you actually see what really is the tool that Mike was alluding to, the thumbs up, thumbs down. And what that is you get an answer, and you get to provide us feedback. Obviously, it counts against the interaction count, which hurts when you have that ceiling. But in the testing phase, as we're still sort of in, and you're always in, I guess, it's always growing. We get to see what the audience thought was a good answer. And that data helps us, again, to change, combine, or maybe break apart 2 answers, and really help us find those avenues that I keep referencing, so those handshakes can be made, because you have all of the data, you have the question that's being asked, and the connection is really done through the constant testing and revising process. And I believe I get the honor of letting Karen take it from here.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much. So the results from the student trials, and we had a generation of going through many iterations. We began in June, July, August to get to the point where you see now. The different students, there wasn't a one who didn't find this enjoyable and fun to use. They all enjoyed it, felt it was real, and it is, of course, a very real case. This all did happen. They talked about just asking the fact question was difficult. Just trying to nail down what are the essential facts that I really need to know to make a course of action. That was, I don't want to say a struggle, but a challenge, and one they appreciated. Several students did enjoy just seeing how artificial intelligence in this way could be applied as they're going through their studies elsewhere. The students reflected backwards on what's the most important question to ask. So insofar as developing one of the learning objectives on asking questions, thinking about them, organizing your thoughts, how do you be a manager to really parse out information, we felt that this exercise actually helps move that on. In addition, on the courses of action that students put forth, there was a range. You have no proof. One student said no police report, not going to do anything with that. Some opted to terminate Lanzi and suspend Bill. Others said terminate them both. There were a number that said do more investigating. And we found that when the students put that forth, I debriefed them subsequently. What more investigating would you do? It was almost an easy way out. We'll just investigate more. And I felt that in some regard, these students can move up the organizational chain, because I've seen a zillion managers see a problem, and rather than answer it, will say, we got to do more investigation, which is, not always where you want to go. But anyway, more investigation. So when you probe them, well, what investigation more would you do? It was not really very robust. It was almost a throwaway. Is this tough? I don't want to be bothered. Others made differentiation about levels of energy and also who got harmed. So it was a good array, good discussions, and enjoyable for the students, and also one that teased out our learning objectives. So let me pause there, and you see we've given you the link to the PowerPoint. You have the link to the case itself. You can certainly use it in your coursework if you wish. The link will work. You will be continued to be testers for this, and we will certainly support or give you information that may be coming as you want to carry through on this. The teaching note has not been developed. We spent our time here on the case development and the chatbot. So again, let me pause and see if there's any questions coming in that you'd like to have us answer.
While we pause, if I may, I do want to say one of the caveats that I wanted to touch on and I didn't really get to is what I really found interesting about this bot was the fact that you're put up against 7 questions and you only can ask 7 questions and you have to render a decision. And I put myself in the shoes of how many times a teacher, a spouse, a boss, if they had just had one piece of information, might have decided a fate for me differently. And now you're in those shoes, and that what it really comes down to is the question, right? Asking the good question to get the good information to make the right decision. And I really find that part of it, exemplary. I think that was something that I never really put my mind into, and now just in every day, I'm trying to ask better questions so I get better information, and all because we had to program for dozens of hours.
The slides have a technology appendix. So Tom McGee, whose email is on the very front of the slides, prepared the appendix and will be an incredible resource if you wanted to hand this over to tech folks that could further your own development of this. And of course, we'll all be available for this moment as well as thereafter to help you further develop that. Certainly, if you have other areas in which you would like to collaborate in this way, we'd love to hear from you. And likewise, we are thinking about other outlets for this sort of way to develop students' competencies. Anything else?
I think we've stunned them into silence, Karen. That's what
No.
with our methodology here. The one question that did pop up into the chat there is, how do you develop a case like this? The case itself wasn't specifically tailored to the technology. We just applied the technology to kind of walk through an iterative process to answer questions around the case. This case is no more special than any other case. It's not like we chose this one because we knew a chatbot functionality would work with it. We really just wanted to be able to allow the students to interact with the case kind of on their own time in their own way, but set some parameters around them, limit to them to the 7 questions. So we're trying a couple of different interventions. Now we could make it 15 questions or 20 questions or what have you, but we figured, one of our early thoughts was let's go ahead and put that little bit of restriction on them to make every question count. You know, and yeah, you're going to run down some blind alleys. Obviously, I could have asked lots of questions like, what's the union stance on how the case came about, or the union stance on how the two employees interacted. You know, what does that have any play into this? You know, what do other managers think about this? You know, have the rest of the company heard about this? Was there a news report about any of this? You know, you got some of that from the questions, but you know, you obviously have to kind of parse out and come to your own conclusion by the end.
Yesterday, we heard about call cases. So as Mike indicated, this is a real case. I could have easily been done with paper and pencil or write a traditional case. So could it be a short case in a different format? Yes. Certainly it's not going to be perhaps as complex as other things that the Case Research Journal has published, but it might be a sweet spot for the 1-minute learning module or something a little bit longer than that. But it certainly could have been a long written out case, but I wanted to engage in the technology and develop a different set of competencies, especially stressing the randomness of information, where perhaps cases that we write might be more ordered and students are given more information. I wanted them to start grabbing at the questions. Okay, so I think we did answer, Mike answered the question about the specialty case. The case wasn't written for this, the case existed. It's a real case, it really did happen. Lanzi and Bill are real people. It's all real. There's a question about, could it be a role play? I think it could be.
Certainly could be. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, depending on the depth and breadth of interactivity with it. I mean, you saw it was very simple questions from me, and then a pretty specific response coming back from the bot. I think as you get a little deeper into the content, you can certainly build in a little more kind of interactivity. Now, you could theoretically, and Burke and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, if you wanted to, you know, say role play, like take this from the point of view of you interviewing the police, you could give them specific pieces of information and they'd be able to play that back to you. So if you wanted to interview multiple people, it would be like working with multiple bots. Does that make sense to you guys? Is that something
makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, you
Sure.
know, if I wanted to talk to the union rep and I wanted to talk to the police and I wanted to talk to a couple of other people. So Karen, back to your point of people wanted to do more investigation. If they could really come to a point where, okay, I'll let you investigate and ask 7 questions of the police or what have you. You certainly could. You can ask 7 questions of witnesses at the gym. You could do a whole bunch of different things, and keeping that in play, you'd have just the data set that goes along with their responses. You know, so you really break yourself into a 7 Samurai kind of film where you can go and reach a couple of people. I think I'm really thinking Rashomon, but that's a whole other story. You can go and talk to these people from this point of view, and have these people that have this point of view, and those people that have that point of view. And you know, does that help you make your decision, or does that just muddy the water for you? So I think that's what you were asking, John. Please correct me if I'm wrong there and you were thinking of something else. There you go.
And I guess Tom and I can kind of answer I guess we can all actually, I shouldn't say that. The intensivity of the build, it's more daily upkeep. It's more knowing when there was a test, when we had a batch of tests, and then analyzing that data, and then really a conversation between all of us, and really deciding, like I spoke of, we have this question, we have this answer. How do I shape that avenue? Do we need to break it out into multiple answers, or just questions we hadn't even, or data we hadn't even thought of that needed to be put in because someone's test illuminated us to new possibilities? So I wouldn't say it was intense as much as I would say it was just an ever-evolving process based on communication.
Yeah, the dirty little secret of artificial intelligence is that we're actually the intelligence.
Yes.
We analyze the questions that people ask, and we fine tune and tweak the answers that come back so that they sound intelligent.
I was just about to ask that question.
And I'll just put a small little postscript on that. Early on, when the case was a little raw and the artificial intelligence wasn't quite where we needed it to be, I had the people that I thought were most intelligent work on the raw case because it was sloppy, and I was looking for great insights on how to fix this or what needed to be done. So it's somewhat ironic that you needed super intelligent humans to work through the artificial intelligence.
Yeah, the point is the bot is incredibly stupid at the beginning, but it's still smarter than me. So I'm gonna let it roll. It's when we really start to dig with it. And Ignacio just asked the question, could you use this to help students study during case preparation? I would imagine you probably could. You'd really have to tailor the questions and responses that you have. I mean, you saw the word cloud that Burke showed on one of the slides. If you've seen lots of word clouds before, you hope a lot more bubbles kind of to the surface and becomes bigger as you start. And you could see this word cloud had questions at about the same size, kind of all over the map. So as the bot becomes more tailored and as we use it more and more, a lot more should kind of pop up to the surface there. So there's definitely applications in a lot of different ways where you don't want to handhold the participants with it all the way through, and you want them to try and kind of explore. But I guarantee you that Tom and Burke will attest that there's quite a bit of work between here and making it a really useful experience. This is a pretty simple, well-tailored case that and again, I think keeping it to those 7 questions really does force the participant to not go off the rails and start, spending 3 hours with this thing to come to some kind of resolution, because they will eventually break it, certainly. And by break it, I mean, they'll just come to dead ends everywhere you go. There's not that much backing information into it, but there's quite a bit of good things that you can do with it in relatively short order.
So you have our links, you have our names. We'd be more than happy to chat with anybody on your team if you'd like to take this further as you think about where you are next in development. But we're resources. That's what the conference is for, to connect, improve, and advance the work that we all do ultimately for the betterment of student learning.
Thank you all.
Go Pirates!
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming out today.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.